G'day and welcome to this week's episode of The Other Side Interviews on ADH TV, our Tuesday night interview show. I'm Damien Curry. This episode is a very important one. Lots of Aussies are starting to really hurt with the cost of everything going up, but not many of us understand exactly why this is happening. My guest this week describes himself as an ordinary businessman who's deeply concerned about Australia and where our country is heading. We hear from academics with fancy titles, politicians and media commentators a lot these days, but we don't hear enough, in my view, from people on the producer side of our economy and society. Ordinary business people, the people who create jobs and who are productive, the people who take risks, who don't get a guaranteed income and have to fight every day to keep their businesses afloat. The freedom and rewards can be exhilarating, but when the money isn't flowing or the government's endless rules, regulations and red and green tape is strangling you, there can be many sleepless nights wondering if you'll be able to make payroll or even survive. These people feel the pain of bad government and bad decisions immediately. For the rest of us, it takes a little while to trickle down. The bad decisions made during COVID are what's causing a lot of the pain that we're feeling right now. Yet most people still think the government's handling of COVID was great and they kept us safe. Scott Pelto is the commercial manager of a law firm in Brisbane City who has such serious concerns about the direction of the nation that he's decided to write a book about it. Scott has an interesting background and mix of experience. He finished high school in the 1980s and went into the police force for 11 years, where he spent 5 as a criminal law prosecutor. While in the police, he completed a Bachelor of Arts majoring in government, Australian political history and public administration, and also a Bachelor of Commerce. And that took him into accounting. He became an auditor, and then he worked for one of the big 4 firms, Deloitte, bringing his policing and accounting experience together in forensic accounting and heading up the Brisbane office for Deloitte Forensic. Marriage and family came along. Scott started the law firm with his wife. The Brisbane firm Schweikert Harris now has around 20 staff and is a thriving practice. He also has a number of commercial projects in ecotourism and equestrian sport. Scott Pelto, thank you very much for joining us. The question is how, with all of that, you have the time to be writing a book?
Well, good to be here, Damien, and the short answer is I don't. But
right, so it's going slowly?
But I think it needs to be done.
Yeah.
And one day, when I have time, I will do it. So, because I think it's important. And I think it's important to basically make clear things that are obfuscated by the way we live and the direction we've gone in.
Yeah. Something has changed, something has shifted, and I think the working title for your book is How Did It Come to This? How did we get here? How did it come to this?
Well, it's, as you would expect, it's not a short answer. If it was simple, we wouldn't be talking about it. I think how we came to this is actually a natural progression, and I think if we try to zone in on just a couple of points and then make clear the basis for things, it might help.
Yeah, so we're looking at it from an economic perspective,
yeah,
because of your background, and also from a political perspective because of your background. So maybe if we, because a lot of us are walking around going, how did it come to this? What the heck's going on? The world feels different. Everyone feels like something's not quite right. Things are a bit of a mess. So let's look at it from the economic first of all, because inflation is very much ever present at the moment. So what is inflation first of all? Because I don't think a lot of people understand what it is or where it comes from.
Yeah, I think again, it's I like to simplify things, and when things get more expensive, when what we purchase, goods and services, become more expensive, that's inflation.
Yeah, but what causes that getting more expensive, right?
Great.
This is the question.
Okay. All right. So, I like to start by talking about the fundamentals of the capital economy that we live in. So, and I like to talk about perfect price point, because it's that perfect price point that we strive for, and when that goes out of whack and becomes more expensive, that's inflation. And so we need to say, why does that happen? So in a capital model, and coming back to talking about a capital economy,
Well, people don't even know that we live in a capital economy, right? We don't get taught that at school.
No.
And we don't understand that this world we live in, I think a lot of kids today, young people in particular, don't understand that the world we live in is not something that just fell out of the sky, that we actually have a a structure. We have something that's evolved over hundreds of years. So before we get into where the price things gone wrong, what is the capital economy?
How does it work?
What's capitalism?
So capitalism, from an accounting perspective, capital is an item on the balance sheet that an amount of money that's raised either by debt or equity and invested in an enterprise that will produce a good or produce a service. And so to bring it all back down to basics and what people really need, we need food, we need clothing, we need shelter. In this world we probably need electricity as well. Now that we've got a population of 7 billion plus people on the planet, the world, in order to do that, we have to use our resources and our technology to sustain that population. It puts us in a riskier position than we used to be in when we didn't have so many people relying on resources in a planet that has limited resources. So there's got to be a limit to the population using those resources. That's a logical conclusion. So the way that capitalism works is an individual or individuals together in some sort of structure or entity invest capital invest money in a productive enterprise of some kind. You could pick any business. I would pick, say, a fruit store, a fruiterer, which everyone is used to. Well, in order to run a fruit store, you need a warehouse, you need trucks, you need staff, and you need access to contacts at the markets. And then you need a distribution outlet and a framework, a mechanism around which to deliver the product.
Yep.
In order to do that, you need certainly skills and experience, but you also need to invest your own money in that enterprise. And when you invest it, you put it at risk. And that, we live in a world now where government is big. And if you wind back when government was not so big, the people, who are making this happen are individuals.
Yeah.
Not government.
No. And you don't need government, right? Because you're putting in your own money,
yes.
right? If you're not putting in your own money, you go out to the world. You go to the market or the capital markets, and you borrow from the capital markets. Either you take on debt, right, or you get other investors and give them a little slice of your business, and that's equity. So the two types of capital are debt and equity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so for smaller businesses and start-off businesses, generally they incur debt, because in order to go to a secondary market, a capital market, you have to have a demonstrated model of something that's going to work and you're going to sell.
Yeah.
So many small businesses start with nothing than an idea and goodwill. So in order for these people to produce, they invest their money and they put it at risk. In doing so, they're backing themselves, so they believe that they will be successful, otherwise they wouldn't, undertake the venture. But at the same time, they realise they could lose all this money.
Yeah.
And I think back to when we started the law firm. So, my wife and I were both professionals. I was working in Deloitte, an international accounting firm, busy all the time. And my wife, Heidi, was working in a law firm, a national law firm, busy all the time. We had no time for anything else, but we had progressed enough in our careers to understand that we had the confidence of making it work outside of somebody else's framework.
Yeah. So you decide, okay, we're going to forfeit the guaranteed salary of a salaried employee, of a worker, right?
The security and the comfort.
The security and the future comfort of that. We're going to sacrifice that. And the reward is you get to run your own show, but also you should get a decent return for that risk that you're taking.
At the very least, you've got an opportunity of a decent return. And so thinking about that capital model and then putting it in the framework of everything. So people who invest their own money, take the risk, and then go about an enterprise of some kind to produce. And let's face it, at the end of the day, production is what we all need.
Yeah.
We have services that support production, but production is what keeps people on the planet alive.
See, I think a lot of people think that the government just pulls money out of thin air and then decides it's going to be greedy and not give any to anybody. And so I turn on the ABC News and all I hear is, poor person here, or this person's had this misfortune. I'm not belittling any of that, but you got all these problems, and the government should do something about it. The government should throw some money at it, right? The government should fix it. But we don't understand that, we'll get to this in a moment, but I'm jumping ahead a bit, but the government, that money can only come from this productive economy that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's people going out with a business, starting an enterprise in a free market that creates or inspires this productivity, right? That produces what we measure as the GDP, or the gross domestic product of our country, what we're all producing and the value of what we're all producing.
Well, I think it's important to understand, take Australia as an example. The only money the Australian government has is what they took from the Australian population
through tax
in the first place, through tax and through a number of other indirect measures, which is important to, we'll get to that later, but the indirect cost of government is an important concept to get your head around.
Yeah, especially in relation to inflation, right?
Especially.
We'll come to that. All right, so we've got these. So you've got a society. Let's say we're starting from year zero or something like that. Not to adopt an authoritarian term, but let's say it's year zero. Australia's just started. Right, we're getting going. Got some people starting up little enterprises, and they start trading with one another, and it creates some productivity and some value. We've got some foreigners buying our goods. That's great. We can sell some stuff overseas. We're getting all this bit of money in. We're able to create jobs for people, so people who don't want to go out and take the risk,
that's it.
Right? They can say, oh, well, I'll just work for you and you just pay me and it's guaranteed and I don't have to take any risk or worry about it. So there's that bit of trade-off there. They work. They might form a union and get a bit of a push to make sure they're getting a fair deal, so to speak. Businesses push back, it all balances out. You don't need government in any of this.
No, you don't. But
the beauty of it.
we produce in a competitive market. And the competition in the market is the key to capitalism.
Yes.
And what makes it work.
Yeah, I've noticed that when they privatise big organisations and make them private, if you don't privatise them into competition, if they're just privatised into a monopoly, they don't become any more efficient than they were when they were owned by the government, so you might as well leave them owned by the government.
The truth is, without competition, Damien, capitalism doesn't work.
No.
Competition is a cornerstone of capitalism.
Now, competition's important.
Very important.
Because it determines prices.
Perfect price
People
point.
wonder, where do prices come from? Somebody just make them up, just wake up in the morning, I'm going to charge this for this. No. Pricing, the perfect price point, just explain that concept. What is the perfect price point? How do you get to it? How does our market work?
Okay, so whilst there's more detail to explain in the capital model, in the perfect price point, we'll talk about the fruit shop owner. He's gone to, has a warehouse, has gone to the markets, collected fruit and veggies of all kind, puts them in a store for sale. He has to pick the sale pricing point of all the goods and items on that based on the input costs and the return on his time and his investment. So
he's got to get all his costs covered, plus a little bit for his time and investment.
And if you think about the time and the investment to the business owner, the business investor, that's the same as wages to an employee, because the business owner doesn't get wages.
So that's the profit margin.
The profit margin is their return on investment. And the concept being that return will be higher than wages because of the risk element. So we all know in an insurance market, as things are riskier, premium prices go up. Risk has a price.
Yes. And if you don't get that return on that risk, well, boom, you don't take the risk, right? Just go get a job with another fruit guy down the road.
Correct.
I'll work for you, you take the risk. I'm not making any more than a salary, so why would I keep going?
So
right?
Perfect price point, it's important to talk about because of what happens in the competitive market, because we're not the only person that has a fruit outlet. There's multiple other fruit outlets, let's say in the same street, and they buy from the same market. And the customer base, the people, can buy from any of those fruit shops. And the only way we can get market share, because let's face it, without market share, without selling our product, we're broke.
Yeah.
So the only way we can get market share is by having a quality product at a good price and a good service, a good deliverable. So to get that good price, a lot of people have quality products, and they deliver it in a appealing way. What we actually need to do is have our price point right. So to get market share, the only way we can do that is to bring the price point to equal to the market or lower than the market, because lower than the market will attract people, will attract buyers. Now, when we're doing that, when we've got this natural pressure to bring the price down, the opposite of inflation, we've got a buffer. We've got our cost base. So we can't bring our pricing down below our cost base, or we won't make money. We won't get paid. We won't have wages of any kind, and our investment will diminish.
So we don't need a centralised controller of this economy. This is what a free market economy is, right? And it has this invisible hand, they call it, that kind of manages that, so that I can't just rip people off and go, I'm going to profiteer, I'm just going to charge $50 for my apples in the fruit shop because the bloke down the road's charging 10.
We do need something centralised. So, I don't advocate no government.
No, me either.
I just advocate less and better government.
Yes, of course we need certain things centralised.
I like to, in this description, equate the role of government to an umpire in a rugby game.
Yes.
It's important for someone outside the model to ensure that competition remains fair. Yeah. Because if competition isn't fair, the model doesn't work.
Well, you've got to have a referee.
You've got to have a referee.
But you don't want the referee jumping in, picking up the ball.
The referee doesn't play the game.
No.
The referee doesn't grab the ball and run for the try line.
And that's what happens when you have a socialist economy, right? When you've got a centrally controlled economy, or when you've got government public ownership of certain things that it shouldn't be owning and running.
The referee ensures competition, and we have a format for this, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. But again, they've got a specific role to play, and we tend to wander away from that role. Perhaps another thing to say before I, finish the explanation of perfect price point is the role of governments is important. It's just broader. It's just wandered away from where it needed to be. We don't need to scrap our institutions. We don't need to tear them down. We just have to remember their purpose and focus on their purpose. And I think we've lost focus.
Yeah.
And I can probably explain why as well, but let's finish perfect price point.
So perfect price point occurs when the market, everybody who wants to buy something.
It's a competitive market, and people need market share. So the price comes down to meet the market. In order for the business to stay in business, they have to be efficient at production, because the only way they can get paid by keeping their margin is making sure that their cost base is below their sale price. And that's their margin. That's how they get paid. So it's probably also important to say at the moment, a lot of people say that, one of the reasons for inflation, apart from the genie that needs to be put back in the bottle, is greedy capitalists. And I think if you understood the capital model, you would never say that as a reason for inflation.
But we hear so many things like, capitalism is bad, it's like, well, really? I mean, it's just created more wealth in the countries that have adopted that system than anywhere else, because it inspires people to go out and start a business, for starters. You're not going to bother in a centralised economy. Why would you bother taking any risk? You might as well just, get a job from the government. So there's that. But also this notion that kids have these days, or have always had, I guess, profit is bad, profit is theft, profit is, that cracks me up, profit is evil,
If profit is bad, wages are bad. It's the same thing, just with risk.
Exactly. You've got to be paid for your work, your effort, your ingenuity, and the risk that you're taking at a reasonable level. And as I said before, in a competitive market that isn't interfered with by government to make it non-competitive, in a competitive market, you can't profit gouge, you can't exploit.
No,
right?
you think about...
You're stuck, you've got to keep it...
The design of this system is, to some extent, when you really think about it, ingenious, because it self-manages. So we don't have to worry about poor management. So people will talk about the greedy capitalist is responsible for inflation. Well, think about it. You're running a business. You want the highest margin, the highest price you can possibly get. You want to price up. If you can, you will do it. The only reason you can't do it is because you're in a competitive market. The market forces price down. So a greedy capitalist is not the reason for inflation, because nothing has changed. They've had the same motivations and the same drivers forever to get more for their product, as much as they can get in the competitive market.
What I find fascinating is that where you do have greedy capitalists, it's not really free market competitive capitalism at play, it's big government, regulation, rent seeking, control, it's all the things put in place for cronyism, exploitation, profiteering and plunder. Well, we're saying, oh well, set up some rules for us, mate, in government, so that I can have control over this, and we just have one airline, or we just have one train network, or
one airline means less competition.
Right.
So
that works well.
So think about the other side of this equation. We've got the investors, the business owners, the capitalists, trying to get their price point as high as they possibly can. On the other side of the equation, you have the people who want to buy a product. Now, they want to buy the best product they possibly can at the lowest possible price. They're not interested in the cost base of the person selling. Yep. They would be delighted to go below the cost base of the person selling. They want the product, they need it. In the case of the things we must have, food, shelter, clothing, they want that at the lowest possible price. And they've got multiple people that they can choose to buy the product from. The sellers have a market where they don't have to sell to one individual. So there's multiple players on both sides of the equation. You've got the buyer wanting to bring the price down, and you've got the seller wanting to bring the price up. With the market competition, this comes to a perfect equilibrium point, which I call perfect price point. Now, the rubber, which is based on what you're alluding to before, once you get perfect price point in a market, any interference in that market doesn't make it more perfect.
Stuffs it up.
There is no such thing as more perfect.
Right.
The pricing cannot get better. It can only get worse.
Yeah.
That's the definition of perfect.
Right. It also strikes me, as you say this, that you've got the capitalist, the business person, the investor, whatever, wanting to push the price up, of course.
That's the concept.
That's their self-interest.
That's the concept of capitalism.
Then you got the buyer, wanting to get the price as low as possible. They don't give a stuff about the other bloke. That's their self-interest. So you got these two parties acting selfishly.
Yeah.
One of the beauties of capitalism is it doesn't require us to be nice. It requires us, in a sense, it will work even when people are selfish. It fits with human psychology.
Well, it assumes
right?
it, and I'm old enough to remember the words of Paul Keating when he said, in the horse race of life, you can always back self-interest. It will win every time.
Yeah. Well, it's the same. Look, you get the same people saying, oh, greedy capitalists, they're trying to put the price up. Yet the same point. If you get a voucher, I get $50 off dinner tonight if I go to this club or restaurant or whatever, and you're not going to go, oh, I'm really worried about whether they're going to be making enough money to keep the club open or whatever. It's just like, great, I'll take the discount.
If there's a problem, the problem is the umpire hasn't been umpiring the game to make sure that the competition exists. Because without that competition, the model
doesn't work.
The model does not
work. It actually
work.
does require, and this isn't something that won't happen naturally in the natural order of things, like pure libertarians would say, just leave it all alone.
Yep.
You can't, because it drives towards monopoly, right? And you wind up with just too much market power. So we have to have this umpire to sort of say, okay.
If you don't have a competitive market, it doesn't work. Now,
so that's the role of government.
That's one of the roles of government. But in this model, yes, that's the role of government. Now, so the next thing we want to talk about is, well, what makes all the prices, because that's what inflation is. It's not one individual's raising their price on their product. It's what makes all the prices in the market go up when we've got this natural equilibrium to hit perfect price point. The only thing that can make all the prices go up in a market is when the cost base, which is a product of the pricing, goes up. If everybody's cost base goes up, all prices go up.
Okay, so Scott, it's a cost base going up. partly contributing to inflation. What's making that cost base go up?
All right. So the producers in the market, the people that are running businesses, they participate in a global market, a circular market, and they have to buy product from other people to put it, into the system. And if the capital model works fine, not a lot changes. There's a lot of reasons for inflation, but there are core reasons for inflation. So think about, what's a cost base that goes into the model that everybody is subject to? And there's some good examples of this.
Energy?
Government. The cost of government.
Oh, government. Worse than energy.
People don't think about, let's start with direct taxes first of all. So direct tax on a profit and loss statement is an expense on the profit and loss. Company tax is an expense. If company tax goes up on the cost base of all businesses, the cost base across all businesses goes up. And if the cost base goes up...
But no, we've got to do more company. We've got to tax the mongrels. We've got to tax more. Isn't that what the Greens tell us?
Well,
if we just tax corporations,
well,
evil
there's, it's probably human nature to dislike greedy people. And we just spoke about how capitalism effectively encourages the greed of people to make the most they can. That's not what stops them. What stops them is the competitive market.
Yeah.
So if you think about a tax on, a good example would be a particular industry. Just say you want to, as has happened recently, increase taxes on all truck drivers. So if you do that, everybody who uses a truck in their business, which is just about everybody, including the supermarkets, which is, topical at the moment because we know the price of food has gone up. If you increase the price on the people who own and operate trucks, does that mean that their margin will become smaller? Well, they work in a competitive market. They want to bring the price down as low as they can to get market share. But if everybody's cost base is going up in that industry, everybody has to put their price up because everybody already has the skinniest margin to get market share that they can possibly have.
Because of the perfect price point.
So when everybody's price goes up, that's not impacting on the owners of business, that's impacting on the people who are buying eggs in the supermarket and milk and bread and anybody who used a truck to get that product to market because the cost of the transport was a component in the cost base and that cost base has just gone up.
So any tax, anything government taxes or takes money, when government takes, that money has to be paid for.
It forms
by
part of a cost
all
base,
of us,
which
because
comes back.
It winds up at the supermarket, it winds up at the petrol pump, it winds up everywhere. Because we're all contributing in this overall economy.
Well, think about this, Damien. What is the productive role in this process of government? Is by the government taxing, is that changing anything in the fruit market in terms of the good that's delivered?
Well, if they're delivering roads and transport infrastructure, that's something government could do, right? That you probably wouldn't, maybe not do in the
No, that's important. We do need that.
They've got policing, they do that.
Yep.
They provide defence for the country. So all those things are important, right?
In fact, everything you just said is an essential government service.
Yes.
And it's the reason we
invented
government in the first place. Because, all the people who decided, in order for me to following on from industrialisation, to produce a product, in order to do that, there are certain things I need, including roads.
So we need small government.
Well, we definitely need government. We agreed that a long, long time ago, hundreds of years ago.
But we don't need excess government and we don't need excess tax because that stuffs everything up.
We need what I would term essential services. We don't need everything above that because everything above that makes things more expensive for everybody.
Okay, so back to inflation,
yes.
which is what that is. The Treasurer told me, Jim Chalmers told me, and I believed him because he's the Treasurer,
Yep.
and he's from Brizzy, Logan, so I trust him. He said that inflation is a genie that comes out of a magic bottle and we need to put the cork back in the bottle. Is that how it works, Scott?
Well, I don't think there's anybody alive that actually believes that.
No.
But there are people that would probably wonder, what is he really talking about? Now, wouldn't that be nice, Damien, if someone with a role, the Chief Financial Officer for Australia, made it clear why we have inflation? Is it clear to you, or is it just a genie?
No, well, to me, I think our government's too big. Our government does too many things. It meddles in too many things. I think we as Australians are to blame because we have this mentality now that I don't think we had when I was growing up as a kid, that, you know, the government ought to fix it, the government ought to fix it, the government ought to do something, the government ought to do this, the government ought to do that. And nobody is educated properly at school. I certainly wasn't. That actually has a cost.
Well, it has a cost.
I thought it came from the magic government money pool.
No. Well, you know, another thing I like to say to try and explain it simply is we all understand, as I just explained, that government is not a producer. We all chip into the cookie jar with our excess, whether we are investors or people who sell our skills and our services as employees, as a component of production. We all chip into the cookie jar with taxes, directly and indirectly, and we'll get to that later. We all chip in so that government can provide these services. So government don't invest in the equation. And I like to say, if you understand as a premise that everything that the government has, all the money and the resources they have it because of the people of, in this case, Australia. That it comes from nowhere else. If the government spend more, it's only logical that it must cost us more. It can't.
There's only one economy and we all share it.
Yeah,
right?
It's not logical to say it came from the genie. It comes from us. If the government spends more, it costs us more, which is how I get to the indirect component that I think, you know, needs to be a lot clearer than it is.
The indirect taxation.
Yeah. Indirect costs, not just taxation.
Right.
So when people think about, you know, what is government activity and how does it impact on me, they think about the way they are taxed and how much tax they pay. Now, in the main, because the way the system is set up, employees don't, you know, go home at the end of the week, take some money out of the cookie jar and send it to the tax office. They never see it. It comes out in the form of PAYG, taken out by people who do payroll, like me.
Could you imagine if like you get your pay every week and you had to actually go to the bank, take out $500 and go down to Jim Chalmers and give it to him.
And then do it again next week.
And the week after.
And the week after.
Pretty soon, I can see why the government takes it out before you even see it.
And the week after, when you're going down, the dishwasher's broken, you need a new one, you've only got $500, I have to give it to the government. I'm without a dishwasher for another week. It would change the way you think about money. However, that's just one way that we give money to the government directly. We also give it indirectly. So, you know, it's a lot easier for people to be comfortable with government decisions and the way they spend money when it doesn't seem like it's having a real impact on them. But like I just said, it does have a real impact on them, and government's spending too much costs all of us directly and indirectly. So when I say indirectly, you know, we've both got parents that are retired and are on a pension. They don't pay tax. But has it stopped costing them? No, because when they go to the supermarket, and you know, I know this because I do most of the shopping in our house, just before, we'll call this timing and not cause, but just before Anthony Albanese became Prime Minister, I particularly remember buying a type of cheese we like to buy, and it was $6.50. When I go to buy that now, it's $12. So we talk about it's the same cheese, you know, on the supermarket shelves.
It's a lot of inflation.
It's a lot of inflation, you know, and when I was at university and studying economics in my commerce degree, they would often refer to inflation as the cost of a basket of groceries.
Yeah. Well, that's how it's the consumer price index is based on a basket of goods, right?
Yes.
They look at general inflation.
That's it.
And then they tell us it's 6%, 7%. But you go to the supermarket, it feels like 50%.
Well, it's
why?
It's not 6% in the supermarket. So all of this cost base, another good way to explain
But
it.
they need to fix that basket by any chance. Like they're putting things in that don't go up much and taking stuff out that goes up a lot to keep a basket looking, it's only 7%.
Well, my background as a prosecutor, so I look for evidence all the time
Right.
to prove things. Well, what would be a good evidentiary model or a good evidentiary position to say that this is right? When government spends more, the cost of everything goes up. Think of something that's just happened in the last few years right across the entire Western democracy, where all of a sudden, for the first time in my lifetime, governments have spent a whole lot more money than they ever did before.
Energy.
Energy and COVID.
Yeah.
So think about COVID. So the government, two things really bad happened in COVID. One was people who wanted to produce the things that we need to sustain life, food, clothing and shelter, were stopped from doing it.
Yeah.
They were stopped, or at least a significant handbrake was put on the process. So production was ramped back a whole lot because nobody could go anywhere or do anything. That's number one. Number two, the government spent a whole lot more of other people's money, much more than has ever been spent in the past, to combat COVID for a variety of reasons. Good, bad or indifferent, it's clear across the Western democratic world that government spent a whole lot more money than they ever did before.
Let's put some numbers behind this, rough ones. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty roughly right here. The tax revenue, total tax revenue for Australia, is about 600 billion a year, right?
Yes.
Billion being 1,000 million.
Yep.
Okay, so the total cost of government in Australia is a little over that. It's about 650 billion, hence the deficit. We call that the budget deficit.
The increasing deficit.
Yeah. To compensate for that, we borrow. Now with COVID, the cost of that, I think they spent, the Scott Morrison government in Frydenberg spent something like 300 billion. Is that about right?
Look, I think that sounds right to me.
Yeah, so it's like half again. Like, I mean, and I remember early in the piece, Frydenberg saying something about, they went and saw John Howard and they talked to John Howard, and John Howard is the wise sort of counsellor, and I admire John Howard to a large extent. But it was like he said to them, "Well, this is a crisis. So all the rules are out. All the traditional rules of liberalism and liberal free market, out the door. Borrow, right? And I just think that's just incredibly irresponsible.
Certainly,
it gave
reckless.
a free pass to Labor premiers to do whatever they wanted, apart from all the political issues that went on with this. But it became very much like spend, and it doesn't seem to have stopped. We've now got I think 800 billion or more federal government debt, right? So this is the debt that we've got to pay off over time.
That's
We've
right,
overspent
with
from all
interest.
those deficits that are building up over the years. We've now got this debt.
Yeah.
Plus all the states now are out of control. I mean, Queensland's never been at, 100 and something. Victoria is like pushing 200 billion.
Yep.
Like, you add it all together, we are well over the trillion in debt. That's our credit card debt, right?
Paid with real money.
Yeah. So let's look at that debt for a minute. Let's just round it off to $1 trillion.
Yep.
Let's round interest rates off at 5%.
Yep.
My math's right. It's $50 billion a year in interest, just paid to whoever's lending us this money, which is what, other countries, I guess.
Well,
so
if you're running a business, there's two sides to the way you spend money. There's capital expenditure and operational expenditure. Any business effectively is valued on its cash flow. Its cash flow comes from its assets and the way they use those assets to produce a good or a service and return money. So when you think about capital expenditure, you can't do whatever you want. You can't get a 3-story warehouse for the fruit. You're limited in what you can do because you have to ensure that the operational expenditure, the money which comes from the asset, is returned within the measures, within the parameters that you have in order to pay the cost of the capital and to make a return to you.
Put that in simple terms for me. You
in
lost me
simple
there
terms, when you've got a government who are spending money on operational expenditure and not capital expenditure, that's a really bad thing.
Yeah.
Because
you're not investing in something that's going to grow in value or be permanent. You're spending it on stuff that you just...
It's a spiral down.
So you can this is why you can have a budget surplus like we've got now, right? And the government runs around going, we've got a surplus, we've got a surplus.
It
doesn't mean anything.
Frankly, the surplus, all that means is we're not adding to the debt. The debt still exists.
So you've got a $10,000 credit card debt, you come home and you say to your spouse, honey, I just went to the pokies and won $500. Whoop-de-doo, you've got a surplus this week on our family budget.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to pay that off the $10,000?
Well, the debt, think about the debt that we've got now. We've really got nothing to show for it. I mean, of course, Australia has capital assets, but they've been developed over time. You know, we have roads, we have ports, we have rail, we have dams, not too many, you know, in the recent future.
Not enough.
But we have all of these things, but what are we spending our money on now? Is it capital infrastructure? A little. Is it operational expenditure? A lot. And it's the operational expenditure, you know, the money that just goes out with nothing to show for it, you know, nothing tangible that has...
But you have to pay again next year.
That has a useful life that you can continue to use.
It's your spending, right?
Yeah,
it's like saying, it's like your consumer spending as a person just going out and, you know, go and have dinner instead of contributing to, like, buying something I'm going to have for the rest of my life. Paying off the house.
You know, so, you know, we borrow money, as individuals, we borrow money to buy a house because, you know, we can't come up with $1 million overnight.
I get the feeling, Scott, especially when I look at other countries, like if you look at, let's take the Middle Eastern countries, the oil-rich countries. They don't pay any tax. People don't pay tax because the government has enough money from the oil,
the resources of the country.
Right. Okay. We've got a lot of resources in Australia. Is
do.
it fair to say, when you look at Singapore, which is a tiny little island, right, and they've got pretty low tax rate, I think it's about 15, 20%. Most people pay about 10 probably, in real terms. So they've got this really low tax rate. They run a really efficient government. They've got to buy even their water from Malaysia. The place is so small, right?
Yep.
They've got to pay for their water. They have been saving for years. They've got these big government investment funds, like a superannuation for the government, right? They call them sovereign wealth funds.
Yep.
They're building this sovereign wealth, this country wealth.
We used to do that.
And yeah, we don't, well, we've got a little one, I think, but we don't do a lot of it.
Yeah.
We pay massive tax. We're blessed with this huge country with all these resources. Would it be a stretch to say we're getting this really, really badly wrong, and our political class and our bureaucrat government non-producing, direct producing class are taking the mickey a bit? Well, you know, is that a fair call?
Yes. So coming back to it, you know, we're talking about the capital model, and that's the conversation we're having today. And we talk about competition in the capital model. In the capital model, the people that participate, including employed people, compete in a competitive market. Government operates outside the capital model. So the capital model has free choice in you as a purchaser deciding what fruit shop you want to go to buy your fruit.
Yeah.
If you don't want it, you elect not to spend your money there and buy the fruit. That's not the way that government works. They work outside the capital model. There's no two-way street. You know, when the government takes direct tax from you, they don't say, hey Damien, how do you feel about paying tax this week? Would you tick that box? You know, and
how do you feel about paying for the ABC? Yeah. I didn't watch it this week. In fact, I haven't watched it for 5 years. And
so
I think it's crap.
It doesn't work that way.
You've still got to pay for it.
They operate outside the capital model where that...
It's gun to the head, literally gun to the head. Well, like literally. I mean, if you don't pay your taxes, you think I'm joking, don't pay your taxes.
Well, I don't
You'll
think
find a gun.
We know, well, I don't think we shoot people, but we do put them in jail.
If they don't go to jail, we would shoot them. If they ran away, we might shoot them. Anyway, yeah. So, I'm just being a bit facetious, but I think the reality is that, you know, we've got to understand that is a force. There is government has the power of violence, the power to use force.
Well, we surrendered
we agreed to give it. Yeah.
To government. not directly, but indirectly.
All right, I'm going to put my pretend social left-wing hat on for a moment and play devil's advocate, okay? So, Scott, you said that the government people were not the productive side of society. No. They're not the producers. However, if I work in, let's say I work in the roads department,
yes.
and I've worked very hard all my life
yes.
to be an engineer.
Yes.
And I sell my to the government, and
yes.
I build roads for you evil capitalists to go and do your
That's
stuff
right.
on. I'm productive. You telling me I'm not productive?
Well, you're not competitive. Did I get a choice?
Right, I see. Okay. Yeah.
Whether I want you to build the road or someone over there.
Right. So I could be replaced by more free market competition. And
someone who I feel when I spend, my hard-earned money is giving me a better deal.
Yeah, and you get to make that choice.
I get to make that choice.
Okay, all right. So well, Scott, if we did that for everything, if we had a market for everything, then everything would get pretty inefficient. There are certain things that government does better.
Well, there are broader things that the capital economy won't do. And it almost comes back to your reason for the ABC, which I probably shouldn't.
Don't start me on the ABC. No, don't open that can of worms. We'll need another 40 minutes.
But if you think about it, as I understand the purpose of the ABC, and you'd be able to help me better with this, Damien, is that they take media to areas of the country and a form of media that nobody else will do in the free market. Media
Correct.
that we need.
Yeah. So there's a component, I've always said there's a part of what the ABC does that the free market will not provide.
Yeah, that's right.
And one part of it is the provision of those services in rural areas, and we can debate whether the ABC is actually providing those services as a primary goal. Another is international reporters. It isn't cost effective for a TV station like Channel 7 or 10 or 9 to have an international reporter in every location or at most countries around the world. ABC should have a wide range of foreign correspondents and provide that service. It's important to Australia's foreign affairs and important to the informing of all of us. And there's certain news criteria that isn't, like, it's more profitable and commercial for me to run a sensational sort of program than to run a thoughtful program like this, which is why we don't. This isn't actually terribly economic in a lot of ways, but we do it anyway because we believe in it. But the ABC needs to fulfil that certain amount of serious content, and I would argue they are grossly failing to do that and meet that part of their charter. So you have a situation where the ABC, an organisation like that, a government bureaucracy like that, has become a thing that just feeds and grows itself, and you have a culture of entitlement, and you get a closed shop after a while. So that the reason the ABC has left-wing bias is not because everyone's going to work going, I'm going to be a lefty today. It's because they're like fish in an ocean.
Well,
they don't see it.
Think about it
in the culture.
Think about it in terms of the capital model. There is no competition in that area. So they're a greedy capitalist raising their prices with no competition. What's going to stop the prices going up? Absolutely nothing. Who pays? We do. Do we get a choice in the payment?
No,
nope.
It's by force.
Nope.
Yeah.
So
so that's unethical, right? I would go so far as to also say that what that creates is a barrier to entry. It actually stuffs the market up, because how do you compete with commercial free? Like, you take the ABC as an example.
Well, they don't compete.
They don't have any ads, right? So we can't compete.
The ABC doesn't compete. That's the short answer to it.
Okay.
They're funded, and it's that lack of competition that effectively pushes the cost of their product up with no other choice for the consumer. That's not the purpose of government.
But it pushes it up for everybody, right?
Pushes it up for everybody.
It's inflationary for all of us.
It is.
Because it causes.
If the government spends more, it costs us more, directly and indirectly. It costs us in our PAYG taken out of our payroll salary, and it costs us at the supermarket and at the Bowser, and in terms of the utilities we take and the clothes we buy and the cost of construction for the houses. It pushes indirectly the cost of everything up. And I'm sure you've noticed recently that it costs a whole lot more to build now than it did 3 years ago. It doesn't fall out of the sky. It's not a bottomless pit.
It's not a genie.
Not at government, not at the individual level. Individuals like you and I, Damien, we can't decide that we will spend, procure and buy everything we can imagine. We do it within a confined framework. Can we afford this?
Yep.
Should we do it now? Should we do it later? Is something absolutely essential even if we can't afford it now? Should we extend ourselves, perhaps borrow money and do it because we must? If we do, we've then got to pull back later on.
One of the most moronic slogans you hear from the left is people before profit. I love that one because it just shows the depth of absolute, complete ignorance.
Well,
and it is extraordinary to me that we went through COVID and so many people, teachers that I know, these people are teaching our kids at high school, all sorts of people, academics, saying things like, health before the economy. I'm sorry, like health and the economy are two different things? I didn't know. I thought that in order to have health, you had to have a medical system. In order to have a medical system, you need to have a healthy economy.
Think about people before profit. It's a nice ideological slogan, but when you put it in actual context,
it's not
even that. Yeah. If you put it in the context of which I was talking before, you've got two sides of the equation, the investor and the producer and the consumer, in some cases the employee. So the investor gets profit for what they do, the employee gets wages for what they do. If wages are the same at profit as profit, just in a different model, then you could also say people before wages. Now, how does that sound?
Yeah, it doesn't sound so good, does it? No, people before wages. I mean, it's just sloganeering and playing with words and semantics and stuff, but it's something I think that the left have done very, very well for a good all my life, right? So that I grew up in this bubble of believing that capitalism was evil, the system that created the wealth which I enjoy and the country that I enjoy it is somehow the worst system on the planet.
Well, we haven't got time in this session to cover everything. We just don't.
No,
but
we'll have you back to cover more.
Well, very very quickly on the left, and the left has multiple factions, or multiple political parties, but the left in this country is embodied by the Australian Labor Party, which I refer to as the political arm of the Australian Council of Unions. It's their body.
Which it is. I mean, the Labor Party came out of the union movement. It wasn't the other way around.
Correct. And under the Tree of Knowledge in Balcolden, it was founded.
In Queensland, yeah.
And they founded it for a range of reasons, but let's face it, the Australian Labor Party is the political arm of the union movement. Now let's get back to the capital economy. So in the capital economy, it works when people invest money and produce for a productive purpose. Does the union money produce for a productive purpose? That's not how they operate. They don't think of what they do in terms of a capital economy. Their aim really is to improve the position for their members, the union members, and they generally do that by disruption. That's been their model for a long time. Now, in 1893, I think it was, or thereabouts, when they formed the Australian Labor Party, that the model back then was they were in a position where they needed to improve the position, which is arguably noble, improve the position for their members, and they felt that the best way to do that was by taking control of government. Nothing has really changed. Today, the Australian Labor Party is still the political arm of the Council of Unions, and their experience, the way that they operate, is not the same way someone who's invested their money in a productive enterprise would operate. So,
but they're the nice party, Scott. They're the party to look after the people and the health and the humans and the human.
We all love nice,
so they say,
including me.
Say.
But sadly,
that's what I find offensive about it.
We need food in our bellies. We need clothing. We need a roof over our head.
I don't mind someone saying you're a liberal and you support free market liberalism and having a go at me. I don't like it when they start pointing at my character and saying, you're a liberal because you're a greedy capitalist pig. No, I'm a liberal because I actually care about people's health and welfare, and I want our economy to work efficiently, and I want there to be less waste, and I want us to make sure that we're looking after the people who need looking after.
I mean, it's very hard to find a perfect model.
As cheaply as possible.
So when people find problems with capitalism, in many cases what they find is correct because it's not a perfect model.
Well, monopoly is one.
But to use the gist of what Winston Churchill, said about democracy and government, he said, democracy is the worst form of government the world has ever had, except for every other form of government we've had.
Yeah.
So think about economic models. We've got capitalism, we've got socialism, we've got communism. Do we really think that we will be better off with those two other models? Because there's plenty of examples in history that tell us exactly where socialism and communism ended up for demos, the people.
We seem to be well down the path of socialism, if what we were saying before is true, that in fact we are already experiencing the negative impacts to a large extent. And we're already wasting a lot, and we should be as efficient as Bahrain or Singapore are with their tiny little countries. If we've already got our government to this so fat and so overblown, and so many people feeding off it, who are never going to let go, right? I mean, they've got their power they've built their little power bubble, and it's the bureaucrats, it's not the politicians. The politicians are supposed to monitor the bureaucrats. But our system's now working the other way around. The bureaucrats run Australia. The politicians just kind of listen to bureaucrats and hope they don't upset too many people so they get elected next time.
The same way the capitalist investors are trying to make as much money as they possibly can in their environment, the bureaucrats are doing what would naturally come as a bureaucrat.
The difference is, though,
the difference is other
competition.
people... Yeah, competition. Other people voluntarily, buy the good or service in the capital economy. Nobody voluntarily buys what the bureaucrats sell. Doesn't mean
now, Lefty, if I put that hat on again, my devil's advocate hat would say, but you get to vote every 4 years. Stop laughing. Come on. Every time we vote, it completely changes the bureaucracy. I've seen it. Not. It's like, do you want this party being ignored by the bureaucracy, or do you want this party being ignored by the bureaucracy?
Where do we start?
Yeah. Well, I think a good series of Yes Minister would probably do explain it that way.
It's a manipulated system.
It is a very manipulated system, and there's a lot of fat and waste in it. Scott Pelto, thank you very much for coming and talking to us on the other side. We would like to have you back sometime in the not too distant future, I hope. And we'd like to see you as a regular around here to help us out understanding all these sorts of things as we move forward. We could probably do a whole other interview show just on government and what it's doing. We might take you up on that and do that in a couple of weeks.
All right, well, thanks, Damien. It's been a pleasure.
Been great to have you. All right. So don't forget to watch this show on our independent ADH TV platform. I want to remind people that the ADH TV platform is totally free for the user. There are cost inputs, but for you, it's totally free. So you don't even have to sign in, would you believe? You can just go to any browser and type adh.tv and bang, right? There's not even anything to download if you don't want to. You simply go to any browser and just type that in and bingo, you're there for absolute free. Now, when you get in, you'll see all the tiles, the little rectangles like on Netflix for all the great ADH shows. It's like a Stan interface or a Netflix interface. Just click on the other side and you'll get our Friday night show, which is our news summary show, or the other side interviews for all of our interview shows. And all the past episodes are there on demand for you to watch anytime you like for free. Just want to point out that the two different shows have their own tiles. So all the episodes of our Friday night show, The Other Side Australia, are all in one, and all the episodes of The Other Side interviews are in the other. And for those of you who like to, watch first, new episodes of the news show, The Other Side Australia, stream Friday nights at 8, and The Other Side interviews Tuesday nights at 6. They stream first, and then after that, they're on demand. Now, if you want to get really snazzy, you can download the ADH TV app from the Google Play or the Apple App Store on your phone or your smart device, or even better, download the app on your smart TV and put it on your homepage or on your TV once and for all, and you always have it at the press of a button. So simple. Did I mention it was totally free? Just a couple of ads to watch to help us pay the bills and manage those cost inputs. Thanks for supporting the alternative media, and we'll catch you next time.